Nietzsche writes in The Gay Science. To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill treatment, indignities. I wish that they should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, the wretchedness of the vanquished. I have no pity for them, because I wish them the only thing that can prove today whether one is worth anything or not, that one endures. Read that again slowly. This is not the writing of a cruel man. This is the writing of a man who had suffered more than most. Chronic migraines that left him bedridden for days, near blindness, violent nausea, a body that seemed determined to destroy him from the inside out, and who had, through that suffering, discovered something that the comfortable world around him had entirely missed. Suffering, for Nietzsche, was not the problem. It was the curriculum. We live in an age that has declared war on discomfort. We have built entire industries around the avoidance of pain, pharmaceutical, technological, psychological, spiritual. And yet, by almost every meaningful measure, we are not happier for it. Anxiety is at historic highs. Meaning is at historic lows. The pursuit of comfort has delivered us not into joy, but into a peculiar kind of numbness, the gray, undisturbed life of what Nietzsche called the last man. So the question this script asks is simple and it is serious. What if Nietzsche was right? What if suffering is not something to escape, but something to use? What if the life you are trying to protect yourself from is the very life that would set you free? There is a figure that haunts Nietzsche's writing. He does not appear as a villain. He appears as something far more disturbing, as the logical conclusion of a civilization that has chosen safety above all else. Nietzsche calls him the last man. The last man is not wicked. He is not violent or cruel. He is, by every conventional measure, perfectly fine. He wakes up in a warm bed. He goes to a job that does not challenge him. He eats well, sleeps adequately, maintains pleasant relationships, and harbors no great ambitions that might expose him to failure or ridicule. When he is sad, he takes something for it. When he is restless, he finds a distraction. When he is confronted with a question too large for easy answers, he looks away. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. What Nietzsche is diagnosing here is not laziness or moral failure in the ordinary sense. It is something more fundamental, a deep civilizational flinching from the weight of existence. A collective decision, made gradually and almost unconsciously, that the avoidance of pain is the highest goal a human being can pursue. And the psychological cost of this decision is immense. When you organize your life around the avoidance of suffering, you do not merely avoid suffering. You avoid everything that requires suffering as its price: depth, creativity, genuine love, the kind of self-knowledge that only comes from being broken open. You avoid, in short, becoming someone. You remain, instead, a smooth, pleasant, undisturbed surface, a mirror that reflects the world back at it without ever adding anything of its own. Nietzsche had a word for the emotional life that grows from this avoidance. He called it ressentiment, a French word he used deliberately because it carried a particular weight. Ressentiment is not simply resentment. It is the resentment of the weak toward the strong, of the comfortable toward the vital, of the life-denier toward life itself. It is what happens when suffering is not metabolized but suppressed, when pain is not transformed but merely buried, where it quietly poisons everything above it. The person living in ressentiment does not say yes to their life. They say no to everyone else's. They do not overcome. They diminish. They do not create. They criticize. They mistake their avoidance of risk for virtue, and their bitterness for wisdom. This is the condition Nietzsche is writing against. And the alternative he offers is not comfort, not reassurance, not a gentler philosophy that promises you can have meaning without cost. The alternative is harder than that. And it begins with a distinction most of us have never been taught to make. Not all suffering is equal. This is the insight at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy, and it is the one most commonly missed by those who either celebrate him naively or dismiss him entirely. Nietzsche does not worship suffering for its own sake. He is not advocating masochism or the romantic glorification of pain. What he is doing is something far more precise, He is distinguishing between two fundamentally different relationships a human being can have with their own suffering. The first is reactive suffering. This is the suffering of ressentiment, the suffering that turns inward and sours, that looks for someone to blame, that uses pain as evidence of the world's injustice rather than as material for self-creation. Reactive suffering does not transform the person who experiences it. It calcifies them. It makes them smaller, harder, more convinced of their own victimhood and the cruelty of existence. It is the suffering of a person who has decided, consciously or not, that life has wronged them and that the appropriate response is to withdraw, to resent, and to wait for an apology that will never come. The second is active suffering. This is the suffering that Nietzsche not only accepts but, in a deeply serious sense, recommends. It is the suffering of self-overcoming, the pain that comes from pushing against your own limits, from demanding more of yourself than is comfortable, from refusing the easy consolations that are always available and choosing instead the harder, more honest path. This is the suffering of the artist mid-creation, the philosopher mid-thought, the human being mid-becoming. The difference between these two forms of suffering is not in their intensity. Active suffering can be more brutal than reactive suffering. The difference is in their direction. Reactive suffering looks backward, at what was done to you, at what you have lost, at what the world owes you. Active suffering looks forward, at what you might become, at what you are building, at what it will cost to get there and whether you are willing to pay it. Nietzsche maps this journey through one of his most enduring images, the three metamorphoses of the spirit. The spirit begins as a camel. The camel is not a weak creature, it is, in fact, defined by its capacity to bear weight. Nietzsche's camel represents the person who takes on the heaviest burdens of existence with full awareness and without complaint. The weight of tradition, of obligation, of self-discipline, of the demands that genuine life makes on those who take it seriously. The camel does not flinch from difficulty. It kneels down, takes on the load, and carries it into the desert. But the camel alone is not enough. In the desert, the camel becomes the lion. The lion's task is different from the camel's. Where the camel bore the weight of existing values, the lion must confront and destroy them, must say a sacred no to everything that has been handed down, everything that says thou shalt, every rule and constraint and inherited certainty that prevents the spirit from becoming what it is capable of becoming. The lion does not yet know what to create, but it knows with absolute clarity what must be destroyed. And then, in the final and most difficult transformation, the lion becomes the child. The child is innocence and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelling wheel, a first motion, a sacred yes. The child is not naive. The child has been through everything the camel carried and everything the lion fought. The child arrives at its innocence not by avoiding the world but by going all the way through it. And from that place, stripped of false certainties, free of inherited constraints, standing at the beginning of a self it must now create from nothing, the child says yes. Not to a particular set of values or beliefs or comforts, to life itself, to existence in its full, unfiltered, suffering-inclusive reality. This is the path Nietzsche is describing. And it is, as he never pretends otherwise, extraordinarily hard. To understand what this path looks like when a human being actually walks it, we need to turn to Nietzsche's masterpiece, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and to the figure at its center. Zarathustra has spent 10 years alone in the mountains. He has thought deeply, suffered quietly, and accumulated a wisdom that he now feels compelled to share. And so he descends, back into the world of men, back into the noise and the crowds and the comfortable mediocrity of the marketplace. What greets him there is not gratitude. It is laughter, but not the laughter of joy or recognition. It is the laughter of the herd, the mocking laughter of people who hear something they cannot understand and respond the only way the uncomprehending can, with ridicule. Zarathustra speaks of the Übermensch, not as a racial category or a political program, as later misreadings would have it, but as a possibility, a direction, a vision of what a human being might become if they had the courage to stop being merely human in the comfortable, diminished sense. The crowd does not want to hear this. They want to be told that they are already enough. They want the last man, the warm, blinking, happiness-inventing last man, and they want him celebrated, not challenged. Zarathustra leaves the marketplace having failed to communicate anything. And this failure is itself part of his education. Because the path Nietzsche is mapping does not run through other people's understanding or approval. It runs through solitude, through confrontation with the self, through a succession of encounters with suffering so complete that the only possible response is either collapse or transformation. The most devastating of these encounters comes in the form of a thought, the thought of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche introduces this idea in the gay science with a kind of existential ferocity, not as a cosmological theory but as a psychological test of the highest order. Imagine, he says, that this life, every moment of it, every triumph and every humiliation, every joy and every agony, recurs eternally. That there is no escape into death, no progress towards some better future, no final redemption. Just this, again, forever. For most people, this thought is unbearable. And Nietzsche knows it. He does not offer it as comfort. He offers it as a mirror, and what it reflects back at you is your true relationship with your own life. If the thought of living your life again fills you with horror, that horror is information. It is telling you something about the life you are actually living, about how much of it you have spent in avoidance, in compromise, in the slow accumulation of regrets. In Zarathustra, this thought strikes the prophet like an illness. He is so sickened by it, by the full weight of what it means to affirm not only the heights but the depths, not only the moments of joy but the years of suffering and smallness and failure, that he cannot rise from his bed for 7 days. 7 days of complete confrontation with existence as it actually is. And then he rises, not because the thought has become easier, not because he has found a way around it or a reason to doubt it. He rises because he has looked at the full, unsparing truth of existence. Suffering included, absurdity included, the smallness of man included, and has found within himself the capacity to say yes to it anyway. This is not optimism. Optimism requires the belief that things will get better. What Zarathustra achieves is something harder and more permanent than optimism. It is affirmation, the decision made in full knowledge of the worst, to love existence as it is rather than as we wish it were. And it is from this place, only from this place, that the real work of self-creation can begin. There is a passage in Nietzsche's writing that stops most readers cold the first time they encounter it. It comes from the gay science, and it goes like this. But what if pleasure and pain should be so closely connected that he who wants the greatest possible amount of the one must also have the greatest possible amount of the other, that he who wants to experience the heavenly high jubilation must also be ready to be sorrowful unto death? This is not a metaphor. Nietzsche is making a precise psychological claim that the depth of a human being's capacity for joy is inseparable from the depth of their capacity for suffering. That the person who has insulated themselves against pain has, in the same act, insulated themselves against genuine happiness. That what we call joy in its fullest, most overwhelming sense, the kind that makes you feel briefly that existence is justified, that it was worth it, all of it, is only available to those who have gone deep enough into the darkness to know what the light is worth. This is a deeply counterintuitive idea in a culture that treats emotional pain as a malfunction to be corrected. We have built our therapeutic and pharmaceutical frameworks around the assumption that suffering is always a problem, that sadness is a symptom, that anxiety is a disorder, that the goal of psychological health is the maximization of positive states and the minimization of negative ones. Nietzsche is not opposed to healing, but he is deeply suspicious of the kind of healing that is actually a form of numbing, that resolves suffering by flattening the emotional landscape entirely, removing not just the pain but the possibility of the joy that only pain makes possible. He writes, "Perhaps I know best why man is the only animal that laughs. He alone suffers so excruciatingly that he was compelled to invent laughter. The unhappiest and most melancholy animal is, as might have been expected, the most cheerful. There is a logic here that runs against everything our comfort-seeking instincts tell us. The most cheerful animal is the most melancholy one. The deepest laughter arises from the deepest suffering. The highest joy is only accessible to those who have not protected themselves from the lowest pain. Compare this with what the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, the human tendency to flee from freedom and its accompanying anxiety by pretending to be determined, fixed, finished. The person in bad faith tells themselves a story in which they had no choice, in which their life was shaped by forces beyond their control, in which their suffering is simply what happened to them rather than something they are in relationship with and responsible for. It is a comfortable story, and it is, Nietzsche would say, a lie that costs you everything. The alternative, the path Zarathustra walks, requires a willingness to stay with the discomfort long enough for it to become something. To resist the impulse to resolve, distract, medicate, or explain away. To treat your own suffering not as evidence of the world's cruelty but as the raw material of your becoming. This is extraordinarily difficult. Nietzsche never pretends otherwise. But the reward he points toward is not a small one. It is nothing less than the capacity to feel joy at the full intensity of which a human being is capable, not the mild, risk-managed satisfaction of the last man, but the overwhelming, tears and laughter, earth-shaking joy of someone who has been to the bottom and come back. The strongest, Nietzsche tells us, are those who can face the full reduction in man's value, can look at existence without the comforting illusions, and not be diminished by what they see. Who can hold the tragedy and the comedy of existence simultaneously, without flinching from either. Nietzsche is not writing a self-help book. He would have been appalled by the suggestion. And yet, running through everything he wrote, there is a genuine and urgent concern with the question of how a human being should actually live. Not in theory, not in the abstract, but in the daily, embodied, decision-saturated reality of an actual life. So what does this philosophy ask of you? It begins with honesty. Not the performative honesty of public confession, but the private, unflinching honesty of someone who has decided to stop lying to themselves about what they are doing and why. The camel's first task is not to be strong. It is to see clearly. To identify the weight you are carrying, the stories you are telling, the comforts you are defending, and to ask, with genuine seriousness, whether those comforts are serving your life or merely protecting you from it. Most of us, if we are honest, will find that several of the anchors we have built our lives around are doing the second thing. The need for approval from our peers, our families, our online audiences, shapes our choices in ways we rarely examine. The need for certainty keeps us from questions that might unsettle what we think we know. The need for comfort keeps us from the kind of creative risk that is the only path to genuine self-expression. These are not weaknesses to be ashamed of. They are, as Nietzsche understood, deeply human. But they are also, if left unexamined, the things that prevent us from becoming who we might be. The lion's task, the sacred no, is harder than it sounds. It is not the adolescent rebellion of rejecting everything for the sake of it. It is the careful, considered refusal of specific constraints that have been accepted without examination. It requires knowing not just what you are saying no to, but why, what you are protecting, what you are making space for, what kind of life you are trying to build in the rubble of the old one. And then comes the child. The child does not arrive easily or all at once. It arrives in moments of genuine play, of creative absorption, of laughter that comes from somewhere real rather than from the need to perform ease. Moments when you are so fully present in what you are doing that the question of whether you are succeeding or failing or impressing anyone simply does not arise. Nietzsche calls this the sacred yes. And the key word is sacred. This is not the cheap yes of agreement or compliance. This is the yes of someone who has looked at existence with clear eyes, who knows about the suffering and the absurdity and the absence of any final justification, and has chosen to affirm it. Anyway, not because it deserves affirmation in some cosmic sense, but because the alternative is a slow, gray, undisturbed death that calls itself a life. This affirmation is not a destination. It is a practice. It is something that must be renewed, daily, in the face of everything that would undo it. Zarathustra's achievement is not permanent immunity from doubt or suffering. It is the cultivated capacity to return, again and again, to the yes, to pick up the weight, fight the dragon, and remember what the child knows. The question Nietzsche's philosophy puts to you is not are you happy? It is something more demanding and more interesting than that. The question is, are you becoming? Are you moving, however slowly, however painfully, in the direction of more depth, more honesty, more capacity to feel the full range of what existence offers? Or are you standing still, in the warm, blinking comfort of a life arranged to protect you from the very experiences that would make you real? We arrive, at the end of this journey, at the concept that Nietzsche considered the highest expression of his philosophy. Amor Fati, love of fate. Not acceptance of fate. Acceptance implies resignation, a kind of gritted teeth tolerance of what cannot be changed. Not even peace with fate. Peace suggests a negotiated settlement, a compromise between what is and what you wished for. Nietzsche is pointing at something beyond both of these. He is pointing at love. Love of the necessary. Love of what is in its full particularity, including its suffering, its absurdity, its refusal to conform to your preferences or your prayers. The love of a person who has gone all the way through the darkness and come out the other side not grateful that it is over but grateful that it happened. He writes, I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati. Let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Read that final line again. Someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. This is not the triumphant declaration of a man who has arrived. It is the aspiration of a man who is still becoming. And that distinction matters enormously. Nietzsche is not offering you a finished philosophy to adopt and display. He is offering you a direction to move in, a North Star, not a destination. The yes that Nietzsche is pointing toward is not naive. It does not pretend the darkness is not dark or the suffering is not real or the absurdity of existence is not, at times, genuinely staggering. It has earned its affirmation through confrontation, not avoidance. It knows exactly what it is saying yes to, because it has looked at it fully and honestly and without the comfort of illusions. And this, perhaps, is the deepest thing Nietzsche has to teach us about suffering. Not that it is secretly good, not that pain is something to be romanticized or sought for its own sake, but that a life that has not been tested by suffering is a life that has not yet discovered what it is made of. That the person who has never been broken open has never had the chance to find out what is inside. That the capacity to affirm existence, to say yes to it with full knowledge of the cost, is not something given to us at birth but something we must build, through exactly the process that most of us spend our lives trying to avoid. Set amid all the vast and serious questions that Nietzsche's philosophy raises, the death of God, the will to power, the eternal recurrence, the Übermensch, there runs a single, insistent, human thread, the thread of a man who suffered enormously, who looked at existence without flinching, and who came back from that looking not with despair but with laughter. With the laughter of someone who has understood the joke. Not a cruel joke, not a nihilistic one, but the profound, generous, overwhelming joke of a universe that contains, alongside all its darkness, the possibility of beings who can look at that darkness and love it anyway. To be only a yes-sayer. It is, as Nietzsche knew better than anyone, the hardest thing in the world. And the most worth doing. To those human beings who are of any concern to me, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill-treatment, indignities. I wish that they should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, the wretchedness of the vanquished. I have no pity for them, because I wish them the only thing that can prove today whether one is worth anything or not, that one endures. Now you know what he meant.